Welcome to Lesson 7. We're going to be looking at fingerprinting this week. This lecture in and of itself is going to be pretty short. A lot of the materials that you'll need are actually in the PowerPoint that you will find in the Content tab. By the way, if you don't have that PowerPoint pulled up, go ahead and pause the video. Go back to the practical exercise listing for Lesson 7 and click on that PowerPoint link that's there in the description of this practical exercise. If you don't have that up, this lecture is probably not going to make a whole lot of sense, but I don't see this lecture taking a whole lot simply because I'm going to leave you to look at the PowerPoint materials that have a lot of the pictures of the materials you'll need for the practical exercise. And at the end, we'll talk about the practical exercise very briefly. There's also a little YouTube video. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second to give you a good example of how to utilize the materials for the lab. And so this really is a lab. So a good way to put your hand on forensics, and we'll be talking about the realism of this because it actually is incredibly realistic and how frustrating that can be. I'm sure you'll get a little frustrated with this. That's actually a good thing. Make you figure out whether or not you want to work in forensics. Me personally, I don't want to work in forensics. Stuff gets very frustrating to me, and I don't do good when I'm frustrated. So at this time, go ahead and skip past the title slide of the PowerPoint and go to slide 2. I wish I had it figured out how to put the PowerPoint up for you while I made the video. I'm not there yet with the video making. Maybe by next semester I'll get that squared away, but since you guys are my guinea pigs for this course, you'll get to do it the old school way. So we'll go ahead and go to slide 2. It says History of Fingerprinting. Let's talk real briefly about the history of fingerprinting forensics and their usage in Western courts. In the 1850s, British officials had a hard time identifying folks in India, which was one of their colonies at the time. Reason being is, obviously photography had not come into full play. If you know anything about Indian culture, there's just a myriad of languages and religions, and really such a diverse culture that the folks from Britain just couldn't identify folks by their signature because of the differences in all the languages and the alphabets and all those types of things. And so they started to use fingerprints as a way to identify folks. And I've got an example there of a fingerprint card that was used for identification from the Indian colony back then. So pretty interesting first usage. In 1892, there was a murder case that was solved in Argentina of a mother who had murdered her own children, unfortunately, and they were able to find a bloody fingerprint of hers at the scene when she had said she was never at the scene, but they found a fingerprint of hers in blood at the scene and were able to undo her alibi, and therefore she was convicted. After that usage in 1902, we finally started using it here in the U.S. and didn't even use it in a case. And that's one of the things you're going to find out about American forensics is we're always really way behind. We have a lot more judicial review of this stuff than a lot of other countries do. And so in 1902, we first used the fingerprint case to identify 2 prisoners at a federal prison in Kansas, Fort Leavenworth Prison. And you'll see there a picture of William West and his compadre Will West. These are actually the same person, even though they look identical. And so you can see there they didn't know how to tell these 2 guys apart, especially since they had the same name. Just a really odd situation that forced them to start using fingerprinting for identification. And so in 1902, they started using fingerprint for identification of people who've been convicted of crimes. And people started to figure out, this is a really good way to put people at crime scenes or touching a certain piece of evidence. And in 1924, the FBI picked up on the fact that we have all of these different fingerprints for all these prisoners to use for identification, which, by the way, the Supreme Court said was okay, that these fingerprints were not actually protected information if you've been convicted of a crime, if they're going to use it in a correctional setting to tell you apart from other people. And so the FBI started to take those cards in, and they start to log these fingerprints, and they develop what's called the ID section. This goes on for almost 60 years, and they do start uncovering different crimes, comparing different pieces of evidence with different cards from individuals who'd either been incarcerated or a warrant for their fingerprints and their fingerprints taken from them forcefully. And this ID section goes on for about 50 to 60 years until 1980. You have what's called the AFIS, which is developed. The AFIS is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. And APHIS is a big set of servers and an office space and a lab located in Wheeling, West Virginia. It's run by the FBI, and it's everything to do with American fingerprinting. And so if you've ever had your fingerprints ran, that's been ran through the APHIS system to make sure you didn't match a piece of evidence out there in an unsolved homicide, or to match against your criminal history. You've never been convicted of a crime before, and try to change your identity or something of that nature. So really interesting thing. You can get jobs at APHIS. There are lots of jobs at APHIS because these jobs are very detail oriented. You have to travel quite a bit to go to different trials. We'll talk about that here very briefly here in a little bit. But APHIS is a neat place. And so if you ever get the chance to go there and you're interested in this type of thing, I would encourage you to do so. So I can go to slide 3. We'll just go ahead and jump right into the science of this thing, talk about the individuality of fingerprints. You're seeing there the 4 major types of fingerprints: arch, whorl, double loops, and simple loop. Those are the 4 main categories of fingerprints. And so this is, not enough to solve it. Obviously, you probably have all different types of major types of fingerprints on your own hands, and so this isn't really evidence in any way other than if you have a full fingerprint on a piece of evidence and it's a whorl and your suspect doesn't even have whorls, well, you may want to look at somebody else. That's pretty much all this is going to do to you for you. But it's an important place to start to know whether or not you're going to have a general match and whether to keep investigating any further. So those are the 4 types of fingerprints. If you go to slide 4, you will see how to identify these 4 different types using the deltas. Sometimes, yes, it can get confusing. You see their arches don't have what's called a delta, or this triangle shape where these ridges will interact and actually form like a triangle shape in the fingerprint. Loop has 1 delta and whorls have 2 deltas. So if you take those little deltas there on the pictures away, you can see where those triangles, those friction ridges come to a triangle. And while we're on friction ridges, these are the actual ridges that are put on your fingers to help you grip objects. And so how is it we get these onto an object? It comes from oil secreted in glands, sweat glands in your fingers that is really pretty much always there that you leave when you touch an object. And yes, you leave it on every single surface, whether that's paper or cloth or skin. You are leaving these prints. A lot of people think we only leave prints on surfaces like glass or finished wood. No, you're leaving the fingerprints everywhere you go. And over the last 100 years and the usages in American forensic system, we've actually found different ways to lift those off of these different types of surfaces. We're going to stay very basic, though, for this course and really just talk about non-absorbent surfaces like glass. And so that's how we get these different types of prints, and we're able to look at them and determine the 4 major types pretty easily and very quickly. Going to slide 5, how are they matched? Well, it's a term called minutia. You can see it there, I spelled it out for you. And the file, the picture that you're looking at is an actual file from an APHIS match. So this computer program gives these different algorithms for all these different fingerprints, and once it has a match, it starts to match those up. And this would be something you would get back from APHIS if you're a detective and say, look, we have, in this case, it looks to be about 25 to 30 individual minutia, which are matching between your suspect's print card and the piece of evidence you sent us. This is a really strong match. And so no defense attorney is going to be able to argue out of what you're sitting there looking at. They're pretty much going to look at their client and say, hey, dude, you touched the gun. You need to tell me what's going on. Okay. Going to the next slide, slide 6. These are just little simple drawings of the different types of minutia. When you do your practical exercise and you're looking at your fingerprint on the balloon that you're going to blow up, these are the things that you're going to look for. And if you were working at APHIS, these are the things that you would be drawing the little boxes on and connecting the lines and saying, look, I found a bifurcation on this, on the print card. I found a bifurcation on the gun, the print that was lifted off the gun. I found an island on the print card, an island on the print lifted from the evidence. Here's a really odd ridge ending right here, and here's another odd ridge ending on this. And you would just do this process until you're able to prove or disprove that the person whose prints were sent to you was actually on the evidence. Okay, and the disprove is really important. That's going to happen too. A lot of people think, well, we can sit here and work on this, and no, it either matches or it doesn't. It's pretty common sense. And when you blow up your balloons and look at your own prints, you're going to see pretty quickly, like, wow, I really got some pretty individualistic minutia that I wouldn't get away with a crime. That I'm going to leave these prints, and you're going to be able to tell that's mine, and that's pretty obvious. Go to the next slide, slide 7. There you can see where APHIS has marked some different minutia. Okay, and you can kind of look at that and see the different ridge endings, the dots, the islands, the bifurcations, all those different things. You can actually see the delta in the bottom right of the photo. Moving on to slide 8. This is a really good slide. This is an actual fingerprint where I've labeled different types of minutia. Some of the verbiage is a little different. There's really nothing wrong with that, as long as you know what you're talking about when you testify at the trial. That a lot of people call bifurcation a Y fork, okay, because it looks like, just the fork of a Y. And so whether you call it Y fork or bifurcation doesn't really matter, as long as you remain standardized in front of the jury. So if you're looking there, you can see bifurcations, ridge endings, deltas. You can even see the individual pores, those sweat pores, those glands that we talked about, where the oil's being secreted that actually leaves the print. Slide 8, more of the same. Or excuse me, slide 9, more of the same. So we're on slide 9 now. You can see there that's a digitalized fingerprint, and you can see some different types of minutia there. So 2 pretty good examples there for once you get into your practical exercise. Moving along to slide 10, how are they lifted from a suspect? You can see the picture there of the blue and white card with the fingerprints on. That's called a 10 card. Okay, 10 card is going to be very important. It's a standardized form produced by APHIS that every sheriff's office, police department, anytime they arrest someone or somebody consents to having their prints taken, or you get a warrant for somebody's prints, that's the card you're going to take the prints on. That's the card you're going to send off. No department has their own card. You're going to use the 10 card. And there's a lot of movement towards digitalization. I think there's a lot of validity to that. But for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to stick to the 10 card. And so who gets these lifted? We just kind of talked about who that is, but it's important to know about the court case of Davis versus Mississippi. It's be an interesting paper to write about the legality of taking fingerprints. Basically, some suspects had fingerprints forcibly taken from them without a warrant, and the Supreme Court said that's not good. They need to have a warrant, or they need to have been arrested. In order to identify them in our correctional system, we'll always have this fingerprint, RE, the West case, back that we talked about. So there's only certain instances under Davis versus Mississippi where you can have somebody's fingerprints. You see down there also the ink pad down at the bottom brings up a good point for your practical exercise. You can use an ink pad. You don't necessarily have to use a marker. But that ink pad is something that every detective would carry around just in case you ever run into a suspect and you're like, hey man, you consent to give me your prints? And they're, sure. Well, I want to have the ability in the trunk of my car to take prints from a suspect just in case I run into them, and lo and behold, they consent for me to have their prints to either prove or disprove they're the suspect I think they are. And so that little ink pad, you can buy one of those at Walmart for like $5. Just something good to keep in the trunk of your car, along with about 20 of those 10 cards just in case. Moving to the next slide, slide 11, lifting from evidence. Honestly, there's a lot of different kits out there, but really what it comes down to is the little fingerprint dusting powder, a brush, an index card, and a piece of clear tape is really all it takes. I actually watched a video the other day while I was working on the practical exercise of somebody lifting it with cocoa powder. Probably not going to work great, but if in a pinch, that's what you got, it's what you got. So just really some type of powder, and they make all kinds of different colored powders. They also make a magnetic powder that works really, really well. But you're going to basically, doing like the video or excuse me, doing like they do in the movies in Hollywood, dusting for evidence. It leaves a really big mess. It's not as easy as it looks on Hollywood. It's actually pretty stinking complicated. You got to practice a lot because once you remove that print, it's gone forever, and you don't get it back. And so you've got to be able to do that on the first time, pretty much on command, and get yourself a good print sent off to APHIS to try to match to a suspect. Moving on, slide 12. This is where we talk about APHIS. It is now technically IAPHIS, Integrated Automated Fingerprinting ID System. What you really need to know about IAPHIS is there's two databases. Okay, the first database is of 10 cards. Okay, so you send a 10 card up, they run it into this database, the computer goes through and scans it in, and it's got that print, those prints in its brain. It says, okay, I know whose prints these are this guy's. And obviously it'd be 70 million sets of print there, it says on the slide. I'd say it's probably 71 or 72 since I've put this thing together. The other side of the database is evidence. And so if you lift a print off a piece of evidence and you send it to IAPHIS, they're going to run it to that side of the database. And it's going to say, okay, so I've got this print, and this print is off a gun where somebody got killed. And we're going to hold this print here. And every time a 10 card comes in, we're going to cross-reference to these different types of evidence. And if nothing hits, then cool, we just hang on to the 10 card for future use. If something hits, bing, 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 it's going to shoot an email out to one of our analysts, and that analyst is going to say, bring them up. It's going to look at them and say, wow, that really is a match. That's huge. And they start communicating with that detective about, we think we have a possible suspect whose print we lifted off a murder weapon from a case in 2012. Wow, good day for you. But that's obviously pretty rare. Those things like that go down, considering 70 million prints. But there's people up there dealing with that every day. But to understand how big these databases are, I've got there's a 27-minute response time. And so 27 minutes to run these prints through the database to try to find these matches. That just shows you how monstrous. You can do a Google search of hundreds of millions of websites for 2 words and get your results back in 15 seconds, whereas this thing's taking 27 minutes to run through these fingerprints. That's how massive this information is. So really cool place, very useful. Would be a neat place to work if you're into this type of thing. Looking there at slide 13, trial and court proceedings, how are these things going to go down? You've got to understand the people who are lifting your prints from suspects or inmates at these places must be trained. You just by watching this video and completing this, you don't need to be lifting prints off of suspects. You're not qualified. And when you get on the stand, you're going to be made a mockery of. You have to actually be trained. And this training has to be APHIS certified training. And if you're not certified, don't be lifting prints, because you can end up on the stand explaining that I trained you, and I'll just go ahead and tell you I'm not coming to testify that I'm a certified trainer, because I'm not. So this is pretty much a layman's exercise for you to figure out whether or not you want to maybe do this someday, and you must be certified. I can't harp on that enough. The second step would be that these prints are sent to IAPHIS, and so the folks at IAPHIS are obviously very well trained, and they're going to have to come testify to their training and to the fact that they actually made a match. Obviously, a computer cannot come and testify. That's ridiculous. Obviously, we know that. So a human being, once the computer makes a match and links up a piece of evidence with a 10 card, then it's going to have to be confirmed by a human being. He's going to have to print out some PowerPoints to show the jury, hey, here's where I made my matches. Here's my training and qualifications. That way the jury can decide whether or not they touched the piece of evidence. And it leads me right into my third point. It doesn't prove somebody committed a crime. Just because you find a fingerprint on a gun in a murder scene, if that gun's got a serial number scraped off and we're not able to recover those, and your fingerprint happened to be on a gun, I can always say, well, hey, you can get me for selling a firearm, but I didn't kill the dude. I just sold some guy. I don't even know who he was. I sold the dude some dope, and then he asked if I had guns. I sold him a gun too. You're going to have other evidence to go with fingerprint evidence. Yes, it's very good. It's very good evidence, and no defense attorney can argue a valid match from APHIS, but it doesn't prove everything, so it has to be supplemented with other types of evidence. Okay. Moving on to slide 14, carrying right on, almost getting to the end. This is where we're going to talk about your practical exercise. I've put up a video for you to look at and how to actually get your print onto the balloon. But I also gave you guys an email last week that told you you're going to need 15 white balloons. I told you to get 15 because you're going to need 5 good ones, and it may take you a little while to get yourself to where you say, okay, that's a good one. I can see a lot of the minutia there. I can work with that before you figure out. So you're going to need 5 white balloons and some type of ink, whether that's a Sharpie. Probably wouldn't want to do Sharpie. I know my kids have washable magic markers. Those actually work really good. You can also get yourself a little ink pad if you've got one at the office, maybe borrow it for the evening and take it home, or take the balloons to work and do the balloons there. And so once you print and inflate the balloons, you're going to have to determine several things about the 5 balloons that you pick, the 5 prints that you pick. Number one, what's the main type of print? Arch, whirl, loop, what is it? So determine that major type of print. Then you need to find 3 minutia on each balloon. Okay, whether that's a bifurcation, an odd ridge ending, a pore. You're going to be able to see down to the little pores. Once you identify those, circle it with a marker, and then just with your cell phone, just take a picture of it. Get some good lighting under whatever you can do. If you want to go messing with your photography that you've learned early in the semester, that'll definitely get you some brownie points and up your score on this a little bit. But get yourself a decent picture of the balloon and those with the minutia circled. And then I just want you to put it onto a Word document or a PowerPoint, and I want you to point out what those minutia are and the major type of the print for all the 5 prints. It says report. I'm really just kind of looking for something that just shows, hey, look, here's how I can identify the minutia, and I can actually use this science a little bit. Nothing ornate, doesn't need to be fancy. Just get it done, okay? If you've got any questions, the best way to reach me this week, it's going to be a really busy week for me, would be via text really during the day, because I do teach during the day. It's hard for me to break away to take a phone call. If you do need to call me, call in between usually 7 and 9 at night works the best. So I've also given you extra time. You're going to have all the way until next Wednesday to get this complete. I just want to, since we're really putting hands on, make sure you can get it done the right way, and you've got extra time to get that done. But again, if you got any questions, let me know. Again, you guys have been a great class. Keep up the great work. It's been really easy grading everything that you've turned in. And I really appreciate the work that you guys have put forth. But have a good evening, and look forward to seeing what you get done with your fingerprints.